Welcome. Quite a few years ago, I was asked to play my Japanese bamboo flute at the funeral of a friend's mother. And at this particular ceremony, there were a lot of people invited from the facility she was living in. So a lot of old timers. And as the person who was officiating um, kind of passed it over to me, I did a little bit of my natural invocation that I often do, before a flute and sound meditation, kind of inviting people to notice the sounds around them and receive the sounds as they're happening. And as I'm sort of doing this little invocation, there was a nice little bit of space, and I had my flute ready to go. This old guy, he looked like he was in his late 80s. And the silence in the room said, "I'm bored. I want to go home." And my immediate response was a big smile. It was just kind of hilarious. But then my second response was, "I want to be that guy someday. I want to be the guy who just says, 'I'm bored and I want to go home.'" I have a tendency to not be aware, not I'm aware of what I need, but to actually ask for it is really, really hard for me. And I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about the need for taking care of ourselves. Some of us are good at it. A lot of us are not good at it. And the question really I'd like to explore is, how do you find the balance of self-care in a world that presents so many challenges? So in this next little bit of time I have with you, I'd like to talk about four parts. Part one, swimming upstream. If you want to wake up, you're swimming against the current. Part two, what I'm calling self-care sabotage. What gets in the way of doing good things for yourself? The third part I'd like to talk about is self-care versus self-preservation. There's a every coin has two sides. One side of the coin is self-care, really taking time to take care of yourself. Other side is like self-preservation or narcissism, and figuring out that line is challenging sometimes. And the fourth part I'd like to talk about is, what does it mean to live with your cup full and overflowing? What does that mean, and how do you do it? So you may be well familiar with the story of the Buddha, the early life of the Buddha. I won't go into a lot of details here, but basically his father wanted to protect him, and his determination was, my child will not suffer. So he lived in a highly, highly protected environment. And as the story goes, as this sort of metaphorical story goes, the Buddha wandered from beyond the confines, beyond the walls of his protected little space, and he encountered four things, which were part of his waking up. He saw someone who was sick. He saw someone who was old. And he saw a dead body. And then he saw a sannyasi. He saw a monk, like a wandering monk, who, in the midst of all this, had a luminosity about him. There's unimaginable suffering now, and there's been unimaginable suffering on this planet for a long time. And being sick, getting old, and dying is what it all kind of comes down to. All of our fear comes from loss. It's the fear of loss. The anxiety that comes from the fear of losing control. The anxiety that comes from the fear of losing your life itself. Of losing love and attention and affection. So it's got all different kinds of flavors. Right now in our culture, the incredible political polarization, this message from people running for office basically saying, if you don't vote for me, you will suffer terribly. speaking directly to the amygdala, to our fear centers. The incredible fear, the systemic fear of our people of non-dominant culture, and seeing now the anxiety and the stress of what it's like to live in a culture that has been so conditioned to minimize the other. The fear of sickness, the fear of COVID, the financial stress now, the number of people just in this country alone who, if the muffler fell off their car, would be under financial duress to fix it. So we've got a lot of stress right now. And so it's an interesting inquiry if you were to just sense, what are your top 3 stressors right now? When you think about that, what are the top 3 sources of stress in your life? Do they have to do with safety, health? Are they relational? Are they financial? Are they a reflection of the culture? Part of the insight from the Buddha's practice was recognizing 4 essential elements that stress and anxiety are part of the human experience. That's number 1. Number 2, if you look closely at that stress and anxiety, it has something to do with attachment, clinging, and holding on. The 3rd is the recognition that you can let go. It's not easy, but you can let go. And the 4th, that there are practices, observances, there's a path where you can learn more and more skillfully how to let go of what's between you and feeling free and feeling happy. When we don't stop to examine those stressors, life can sometimes feel like a bad dream. It certainly has for me. Like, how did we get here? My generation was born into incredible wealth and expansion. Boom times in this culture, all through my life, which provided a tremendous amount of opportunity for me and people of my age. And now we're seeing this intense contraction. And I wonder sometimes how the expansion and how the contraction works. When women got the vote, there was this kind of retrenching reactivity within the culture. After the end of slavery, expansion followed by Jim Crow, deep contraction. So we're living in this world that seems pretty crazy and a little bit out of control. And when we stop and really register the impact that it's having, we're all feeling it. At least everyone I'm talking to is feeling it. That's this underlying kind of clench. So just as this metaphor of the Buddha in his awakening, when he met this sannyasi, this monk who had owned nothing, but seemed really free, that got him going on his path. And if you want to wake up, you need to see how reality works, because the practice is really about seeing clearly into the nature of reality. It's penetrating insights into the nature of reality. So recognizing that stress occurs to everyone, that there's a cause of that stress, if you really look closely, that you can actually remedy the cause of that stress, and that you can actually learn how to become more skillful navigating this life. It's exciting, but oh boy, it's swimming upstream, as the Buddha said, not just your own conditioning, but the conditioning of our culture. You may have noticed that in our culture, more and more there's this message of slow down and pay attention, but a lot of it is speed up and get what you need right now, even if it means taking it away from someone else. So when you want to wake up, you are exploring what it's like to sense the unconditioned self of who you are without any conditioning, that sense of unadulterated awareness itself. And in order to do that, you need to come in contact and know deeply the conditioned self. you will begin to see into your unconscious patterns. You begin to see your preferences, your desires, your aversions. And it is swimming upstream. It is hard. And that is why through the millennia, there have been ashrams and monasteries and collectives of people practicing together. Because this is really, really challenging. If you're swimming upstream, and I know I talk about this a lot, but I paddle on the Potomac River every day, and I swim and I paddle upstream every day. You need fuel in the tank. It takes energy and concentration and focus, and if I don't have the fuel in my body to paddle, and if my boat isn't set up exactly as it needs to be, I'm not going to get very far upstream. And in that same way, you need to tend to the vessel of your body and mind and heart. It requires maintenance. It requires fuel. And when you fail to attend to your vessel and to yourself, it becomes a recipe for frustration. It becomes a recipe for more stress and more suffering. And even though we know what to do, and I know how I should eat, I know how I should work out, I know when I should go to bed, we fail to do it. I'd like to talk a little bit about what is that? What gets in the way of taking care? There's a story before my time told of Tara's son, who was quite young, maybe 3 or 4, and they were always looking for new challenges for him and new stimulating things. And a lot of times he was kind of resistant, just didn't want to do it. So they would say, hey, do you want to go to the museum? And then it'd be a long pause, and then he would say, maybe tomorrow. So that became part of the lexicon of the Brock culture. When you don't want to do something, maybe tomorrow. We've got wonderful excuses for not engaging in life. I've been working so hard. I need some downtime. I'll start this tomorrow. With all this going on in the world, I need my own break. I don't have time right now. But we also have excuses for not practicing self-care. I was talking with someone. There's a dad with a bunch of kids. And he was burning out. And we got into a little investigation around his burnout. And then he realized, and he said, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but I don't want my kids to see that I'm actually enjoying myself. I want them to know that life is hard and you have to sacrifice. It's pretty powerful just to see that whole internal mechanism. I know for myself, what I'll tell myself is I don't have the time to slow down right now. I have too many deadlines. This stuff has to get done. I talked with someone recently about what got in the way of her slowing down and taking care and filling her cup. She said there are so many people more needy than I am. There's so many people suffering more than me. And I would be ignoring them if I took that time for myself. Others feel there's just too much to do. Other people have a sense of shame attached to having to slow down and practice self-care. That there's some sense of failure if I have to slow down. But I think a big part of what gets in the way, certainly for me and certainly for others, of actually slowing down and kind of sensing what's needed and kind of offering that, is we don't want to feel what's under the surface. There's that classic question, if you weren't angry with someone, what would you have to feel? And quite often, we're just scared of turning off the engine because there's exhaustion under there, there's sadness, there could be hopelessness. And that's part of what this practice is all about. So just a little inquiry, if you don't mind. This will be just a few minutes. If you like, you can close your eyes. I'd like to explore two questions. The first one is kind of a review of just something I mentioned casually a few minutes ago. First, take 3 slow, deep breaths. And you might just sense, what would you say are the top 3 sources of stress in your life right now? If you had to name 3, what would they be? And take a few moments just to reflect and think of 3 of your main stressors. And the second question, when you are feeling stress, what gets in the way of you stopping and practicing self-care? If you like, you can deepen your breath. I often think of meditation as sort of 2 things. The first is self-awareness, just recognizing what's happening. And the second is self-diagnosis. So what is happening and what's needed? How do I be with this? It makes the meditation practice incredibly nuanced and incredibly fluid, because you recognize there are times when what might balance you is sort of focus and concentration, or it might be opening more into allowing, or maybe just letting things be. But in that same way, it can be recognizing when you're exhausted and taking time to rest. Recognizing when your blood sugar's off and you need to eat and taking time to eat. It's fascinating to me all the ways that we fail to respond to that impulse for self-care and filling the cup. You know, it's so powerful to explore, why would you allow yourself to remain at a level of burnout? Why do I do it? There's a huge difference between running on empty and running on full. And we all know it. You know, the times when you're rested, you're well fed, you're feeling grateful, you feel good, you've got more energy than you know what to do with. Isn't life amazing? It's just amazing to me. That's when compassion flows, that's when generosity flows. You're fueled by this sense of overflow and gratitude. And then the times when we're running on half or we're running empty, life is so grim. I really feel that one of the main elements of practice is that practice of recognizing when you need to pause and fill your cup, when you need to slow down. I've been getting migraines since I was about 6 years old, and I have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Why do I get them? And for some people, it's a very clear trigger. You know, red wine or cheese or something like that. And as best as I can determine, my migraines are a kind of a collective of triggers. Ultimately, they're forms of stress and then me not listening to the signals or catching on to the signals too late. It has something to do that when I get anxious, it sort of shuts down my appetite and it shuts down my kind of somatic awareness. So I can't or won't eat. I don't drink enough fluids, so I start getting dehydrated. and my blood sugar gets off. Something must go off in my brain chemistry, and then I get these strong sensations at the base of my skull, and then they get locked in for anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 days. What I'm missing is that not listening part. The deep, deep listening. Something in me misses those early cues. They're just not there. Somehow I override that anxiety, and quite often it's around getting stuff done, which is usually fueled by some fear of not being enough. So we all have this capacity to tune in and listen, but it's also amazing how much information we miss. I often find it's really helpful just to give myself a dashboard on 4 particular areas. So I like to just offer you this. It just takes a few minutes. So if you like, you can close your eyes, and you might slow down and deepen your breath, and take 3 breaths once again, and allow yourself to relax on each exhalation. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a sense of well-being and vibrancy, and 1 being low energy, stress, suffering, anxiety. When you check in with the physical body right now, how would you rate yourself between 1 and 10 on a scale of well-being? Kind of moving beyond the physical body, when you sense kind of the emotional body, the kind of the limbic system, the quality of heart, the quality of mood, how would you rate yourself from 1 to 10? And now when you sense the mental body, the quality of mind, how would you rate the quality of mind, 1 to 10? And your experience of spirit or presence or soul, or however you would language that, kind of quality of presence on a scale of 1 to 10. And if you like, you can open your eyes. That little check-in, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, is all part of that practice of self-awareness. And as you begin to sensitize yourself to what's actually going on, we can begin to learn more about ourselves. The classic joke when you start meditation, you'll feel better. You feel your sadness, your anger, your grief better. And what's happening is you actually become more aware of these signals that are below the line. You start to become more aware of what's unseen and unfelt. And it's an opportunity to get more in tune with what's there. And it oftentimes points to an unmet need, something that you're needing. And when you can name it and you can sense it, you have the possibility of responding to it. And so we can look at our needs on a couple levels. One is physical. When you really just check out your body, it's got needs all the time. It needs to rest, it needs to move, it needs input, it needs output. And I am so surprised that when I can sit with people and get to a place of really having them close their eyes and sort of somatically sense, what is it that you need in your life right now? I'm surprised how many people will say, I need more sleep. I need more exercise. I need to get out in nature. I need to eat better. And it is stunning how important this is. Attending to the physical can take care of so many issues. There are many, many therapists and psychologists who will not work with you unless you are exercising. So attending to the physical is just huge. And then the next is emotional. We all have emotional needs. There's one line from the book, Feeding the Hungry Heart, kind of talking about eating issues, of when someone said, a woman said that when I'm pulling the second canister of Ben & Jerry's out of the freezer, I finally come to recognize what I really need is a hug. Honoring the need for emotional well-being can help you fill your cup. We have needs that are spiritual. We have a deep, innate inner longing to feel connected to all things. And of course, we try to fill it with temporary solutions, all those things that we think are going to make us happy, but are conditional and like sand, they're not solid. Having something to kind of fill that, to be on a path. We have intellectual needs. Is your mind being stimulated enough? Are you learning new things? We have social needs. We have the need to be seen and heard, the need to feel connected. When I read an article it said, it was in Forbes, I think, that said if you take your 5 best friends and average out their income, it's probably your income. I recognized from that I needed new friends. But we resonate with the people we spend the most time with. We have a need for safety and security. And oftentimes, if we don't address that, there's just this unconscious clench underneath. So recognizing that these needs are incredibly wholesome. The need to feel alive and vibrant, the need to feel your heart connected, the need to feel connected to all things, the need for your mind to be engaged, the need to be around people who stimulate you, who want what you want, the need for safety and security. They're honorable needs. And if you begin to really slow down and pay attention, those needs will be speaking to you. And the question is it possible to respond with compassion and kindness and action? But quite often we are so driven. There's a beautiful book called On the Sabbath, called about the Sabbath. And one of the inquiries there is, what exaggerated sense of self-importance do you have to think that you can't take a day off? That the universe won't go on without you. The risk of taking time for self-care in the midst of craziness is very, very challenging. And yet we have these amazing models of people who have, in the most challenging times, have found a way not only for self-care, but for a deep inner awakening. Viktor Frankl, in his book, In Search of Meaning, he was exploring the question, how was everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average prisoner? And what he noticed that for many people, first there was shock, and then there was apathy, and then there was a sense of disillusionment. And for many of us, when life grinds you down and the disappointments, they often lead us to a sense of feeling disempowered, a sense of apathy, of being deeply, deeply disillusioned. But he also went on to explore what really drove his message out to the world was that we actually have freedom of choice. And he writes this: "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men and women who walked through the huts comforting us, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from someone. But one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And this is exciting because this is swimming against the stream. That recognizing when you're exhausted, when your cup is empty, that it's possible to turn your attention to fill your cup. And it's challenging because you have to say no to certain things. A quick reflection, if you like, if you can close your eyes. Again, you can take 3 slow, deep breaths. And earlier, we explored your top 3 stressors. And now, if you could just think of 3 things that you're dealing with in your life that just drain your energy. And now a second question. At least 3 things. What fills your cup? What gives you energy? What enlivens you? Imagine that you could do more of what gives you energy. If you like, you can deepen your breath. There's a great exercise, which I've done in the past. It's called your drains and gains. To write down everything that drains you. Just kind of acknowledge the stuff that kind of pulls energy out of you. But then to really focus on what gives you energy. Like what enlivens you, what lights you up. And it's different things. It may be going outside and being in nature. It might be going for a walk. It might be reading a good book. It might be watching a movie. It might be having coffee with a friend. It might be spending time with your pet. But make that list of what fills your cup. And then put it on the wall next to your computer. You know, Viktor Frankl talked about stimulus and response. Something happens and then you react. This practice is about widening the gap, opening up the gap. And when you realize that you have a choice, that you can actually choose how you respond. So there are a few things that I'm going to touch on. It's so important to recognize that self-care can be directly linked to kind of self-preservation and narcissism. You know, that you can sort of practice self-care as a way of kind of avoiding what's going on. So it's about finding self-care and resilience, you know? Really, really tough because it's very easy to also flip into kind of self-denial. I remember one line from a Schwarzenegger movie, you know, where they're out in the jungles fighting or something, and someone says, "You're bleeding, man." And the character says, "I don't have time to bleed." You know, we have that self-denial here. But here's a couple things that I have found really, really helpful. One is to clarify your must-haves and your nice-tos. What are the must-haves in your life that will help to guarantee that you can get your cup to full and overflowing? The things that they're non-negotiables. what would those be? It might be a certain amount of sleep, or a certain amount of time when you go to bed, or a certain time when you stop working, or a certain amount of exercise. And I have found for my life, when I clarify what those must-haves are, the non-negotiables, it makes all the difference in the world. I'm also really intrigued by this whole concept of the minimum effective dose. Like, what's the least amount I can do for the maximum effect? And for me, 20 minutes of meditation is sort of my minimum effective dose. I just have this sense that if I can sit for 20 minutes, it's going to give me enough equilibrium where my nostrils will still be above the waterline by the end of the day. And for me, there's a certain amount of exercise that it's a must-have. It's a non-negotiable. I know that if I don't do this much, then it's going to set me back. And there's certain nutritional things. These are the must-haves. Locking those in, it can be really, really helpful. What are the must-haves for self-care? The things you just commit to and you align your life around that. The second thing is around learning how to say no. It's been such a challenge for me. I know it's a challenge for so many people because life will just keep asking of you. I was wanting to work on a big project, and I was speaking with someone who had written a whole number of books, and he said, I've noticed that if I don't really focus on what I need to do, then my life becomes helping everyone else do what they want to do and responding to their requests. So learning how to say no is really, really hard, but I like to think of it this way, that when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. What is it that you're saying yes to when you say no? That can make a huge difference. So when you say no to that invitation to give a talk late at night, you're saying yes to self-care and going to bed early. Find that so, so helpful. I had mentioned earlier these words from Thich Nhat Hanh, or the story of the boat people leaving Vietnam, who were beset by pirates, or beset by horrible storms. And he said, if there is one person who is calm on that boat, the boat would remain calm. And the question becomes, how can you be the calm one in your boat? How can you be the one that people look to for that sense of equilibrium? How can you model for your children, for your family, how to be in the world? If you think of filling your cup as the essence of your spiritual practice, you may find that to be a really powerful reframe. It's easy to respond to suffering with anger. It's easy to respond with rage. And anger and rage have a certain effectiveness in the world, no doubt. But when you can process that rage to wisdom and compassion, it's a different level of effectiveness in the world. Another element, and again, back from Viktor Frankl, he said that those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. And I love that question of why. When I sit down to meditate and I don't really want to do it, but I know it's good for me, if I ask myself, why am I doing this? It opens up this emotional field. It connects you. Why are you doing what you're doing? Your top 3 projects that you're handling in your life right now, why are they so important? Opening up to the why can open you to a greater sense of reserves, a greater sense of creativity, a greater sense of possibility. Self-care, filling your cup, is perhaps your greatest contribution in life. It can look like narcissism. It can look like you're being egotistical. It can look like you are a taker rather than a giver. But it becomes a very, very interesting experiment. If you can truly fill your cup, how you experience the world, your impact in the world can be dramatically enhanced. And I wish you so well in your practice. We're going to close with a short reflection and another short reading from Viktor Frankl. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And if in your own time now, you can take 3 slow, full, and deep breaths, softening on the out-breath. And just sensing all the challenges of life right now, all the turbulence in our world. Is it possible for you to be the calm one in the boat? What would you have to say no to? What would you have to feel if you were to listen deeply to what you most need? What awakens in our practice is wisdom, the capacity to see clearly, to see into the nature of reality itself. And the second arising is of compassion, of kindness and joy. And imagine your life being informed by wisdom and by loving presence. Imagine yourself again and again being held and informed and acting from this place. And listening to these words from Viktor Frankl. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers. The truth that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which anyone can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. Our salvation is through love and in love. You might take a moment to deeply wish yourself well in your practice. And imagine you could radiate this well-wishing out 360 degrees out to all beings in all directions. And as you radiate it out, imagine you can simultaneously radiate it within. May all feel happy. May all feel safe. May all beings feel free. If you like, you can now gently deepen your breath. And you can let your eyes open. Thank you so much for taking this time. It was great to be with you, and may your cup be full and overflowing and radiate out in all directions. Thank you so much, and take good care.